He returned to the nursing home 10 years later and found her waiting. He told himself it was just a visit, but the truth was, he needed to know if she was still there. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. David hadn't been back to the nursing home in 10 years, not since the spring he left town for a job that turned into a career, a move that turned into a life, and a goodbye that turned into silence. But today, something made him turn his car back toward the place he hadn't let himself think about in too long. It looked almost the same. The sign out front had been updated, newer font, brighter paint, but the brick building behind it hadn't changed. Still tucked between a quiet park and an old Methodist church. Still the kind of place people didn't notice until they needed it. David pulled into the parking lot and stared at the front entrance. For a moment, he didn't move. Just sat there with the engine off, keys in hand, heart steady but heavy. He wasn't sure why today had brought him back. Maybe it was the box he found last week while clearing out his storage unit. Inside were old photos, volunteer badges, and one letter she had written him. He hadn't opened it again. He didn't need to. He remembered every word. Finally, he got out of the car. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lavender and hand sanitizer. The floors were cleaner than he remembered, and the front desk was staffed by someone he didn't recognize. A younger woman with a warm voice and bright eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. David hesitated. "I used to volunteer here, a long time ago." She smiled. "Welcome back. I was just wondering if a resident named Evelyn Hart is still here." The name came out more quietly than he expected, almost like he didn't want to hear the answer. The woman typed something into her computer, then looked up. "Room 114. He blinked. "She's still here?" She nodded. "Would you like to see her?" David tried to hide the way his throat tightened. "Yeah, if that's all right." The walk down the hallway was slower than he expected. Everything looked so familiar. The beige walls, the framed nature prints, the steady beep of monitors in some rooms, the quiet shuffle of nurses moving from door to door. Room 114 was at the end of the hall. He remembered that too. The last time he'd stood in front of that door, he had told her he'd be back soon. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday. He'd meant it. He just never followed through. 10 years. He reached the doorway and looked inside. The room was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. The bed was made. A small stack of books sat untouched on a tray table. He stepped in slowly, his shoes barely making a sound against the linoleum. He didn't see her at first. Then a soft voice came from the corner. "You always did walk too quietly." David turned. She was sitting in the chair by the window, thinner now, hair more silver than gray, but her eyes were the same. Calm, sharp, unmistakably her. He felt like he was 21 again. "Mrs. Hart," he said, barely above a whisper. She gave him a look. "You're late." And then she smiled. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I didn't know if you'd still be here," he said. "I didn't know if you'd ever come back." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure either." She looked out the window for a moment, then back at him. "But you're here now." He stepped farther into the room, pulled the chair closer, and sat down beside her. 10 years had passed, but in this moment, none of them mattered. The chair creaked under David as he sat down, but she didn't flinch. She just watched him, her eyes studying his face like she was matching it to a memory. He didn't know what to say at first. So much time had passed that it felt almost unreal to be sitting here again, across from her, in the same room where everything had felt so familiar once. But now Now it was like flipping through a photo album where half the pages were blank. "I thought about this place a lot," he said finally. She smiled, just a little. "But thinking about a place isn't the same as returning to it." He nodded slowly. "You're right." Her voice was softer than he remembered, but still clear. That teacher's tone never really left her. She used to sit with a book in her lap and correct the crossword puzzle in pen. She'd test him on old vocabulary words while he restocked bookshelves or ran errands for the nurses. They used to laugh when he got the definitions wrong. Back then, it felt like she was teaching him something more than just words. She adjusted the blanket across her knees. Her hands moved slower now, a little more carefully. "So," she said, 10 years. What happened?" David hesitated. He looked down at his hands. "Life happened." "That's the excuse everyone gives," she said, but there was no malice in her tone. He sighed. "After graduation, I took a job in Chicago. Thought I'd be there a year. It turned into 4. Then another job came along. Then I moved again. I kept telling myself I'd come back to visit. I even checked the address once. But I never followed through." Evelyn leaned back slightly, watching him. "I remembered your birthday one year," he added. "I had it on a post-it note. It fell off the fridge and I found it a week too late. I almost called the front desk, but I didn't." She was quiet for a moment. "You weren't the only one," she said gently. "People say they'll come back. Most don't." He swallowed hard. "You're not mad?" She gave a small shrug. "I was a teacher for 40 years. You learn not to waste time being mad at people who mean well." That hit him in a way he hadn't expected. She turned her gaze toward the window. "You know, I used to wonder about you. Every now and then, someone would come down the hallway and I'd think, maybe that's him. But it never was." "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him again. "Don't be. You're here now. That counts for something." David sat back in his chair. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding his shoulders until she said that. His body slowly relaxed. "I kept a few things from when I volunteered," he said. "Pictures. One of your letters." "Which one?" "The one you gave me the week I left for graduation. The one that said, 'Never forget the people who knew you before you became who you thought you needed to be.'" Her eyes softened. "That sounds like something I would say." He smiled. "It stuck." Evelyn reached over to the small table beside her chair and picked up a worn notebook. The cover was faded, the pages slightly curled. "I wrote that for a reason," she said. "You were always chasing something. I didn't want you to forget who you were before the chasing started." David looked at the notebook. "You still write?" "Not as much. My hands aren't what they used to be. But I jot things down now and then. Thoughts, names I want to remember, things I don't want to lose." He nodded slowly. "I get that." For a long moment, they just sat there. No pressure to speak. No expectation to fill the silence. David looked around the room again. It had changed, but not in any big way. A new lamp. A different curtain pattern. But the feeling, it was still there. The same quiet warmth he remembered. "I'm glad I came back," he said. Evelyn smiled. "So am I." And that was enough for now. David came back the next day. He hadn't planned to. In fact, when he walked out of the nursing home that first afternoon, he assumed that might be it. A single visit to close an open chapter. But something about the way Evelyn looked at him when she said, "You're here now," had stayed with him. It echoed louder than he expected. So, the next morning, he stopped at a small bakery near his hotel and bought 2 muffins. 1 blueberry, 1 banana nut. He wasn't sure which she liked, or if she could even eat them anymore. But it felt right to bring something. When he walked back into room 114, she was already awake, sitting up in her chair by the window again, same as before. Her hands were folded in her lap, and a knit blanket was draped across her knees. "You're back," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I said I would be." She looked at the small paper bag in his hand. "Did you bring a bribe?" "Muffins," he said, holding them up. "You still like banana nut?" "I always liked blueberry better," she said. He handed her the one she preferred and pulled the chair close again. There was something about how easily he settled into that spot. Like 10 years hadn't passed at all. She took a small bite. "Dry," she said with a straight face, then smiled. "But I'll forgive you." David laughed. "It was either this or gas station donuts." "You made the right choice." They sat like that for a few minutes. No rush, no agenda, just two people with time. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Do you remember the story you told me the day we met?" She narrowed her eyes. "You mean the one about the bird that kept flying into my window?" "No, the one about your 3rd-grade student who turned his spelling test into a comic strip." Evelyn's face lit up. Now that was a child with imagination. "You said he never spelled elephant right, but he could draw one better than anyone in the room." She chuckled. "He did. And he made it wink, too." David smiled. "That was the first time I realized learning didn't have to look one way." Evelyn looked at him carefully. "Is that why you changed majors?" He blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected. You stopped wearing that engineering badge around your neck." "I switched to social work." She nodded. "Figured." "I didn't tell you at the time." "You didn't have to." There was a pause, comfortable but thoughtful. "I used to think about telling you," David said. "So many times. But life just got noisy." "It always does," she said gently. "I think I just needed someone to believe I wasn't wasting time, that I was still going somewhere, even if the path looked different." "You needed someone to see who you were becoming." "Yeah," he said. "Exactly that." Evelyn glanced toward the window. A breeze nudged the curtains. "You were always looking for something with meaning. Most people don't know that at 21. You did." David looked at her, really looked at her. "You helped me see it." She didn't answer right away. Then, "You helped me too, you know." He frowned. "I don't think I did." "You did. I'd been here for 3 years when we met. I was tired. And then here comes this awkward kid with too many questions and not enough patience. You reminded me why I love teaching." David let the words sink in. He hadn't come back looking for praise, but hearing it, after all this time, hit a place in him he didn't know still needed to heal. "I never forgot you," he said. She smiled. "I figured that out yesterday." The sun shifted slightly through the window. Evelyn reached for her notebook again and opened it to a fresh page. David watched her pick up a pen and write something slowly, her hand a little shaky but determined. "What are you writing?" She didn't look up. "Your name." "Again?" "Yes," she said. "Because now you're not part of the past anymore." And somehow, that meant everything. The next time he visited, it rained. Not just a drizzle. Real rain. The kind that made everything smell like wet pavement and made people slow down whether they wanted to or not. David pulled into the parking lot with his windshield wipers swiping at full speed, the sky heavy with gray. He didn't bring muffins this time. He brought something else. An old photo, tucked inside a folder, the corners a little bent from years in storage. He carried it under his jacket to keep it dry, then walked through the familiar glass doors, nodded at the receptionist, and made his way back down the hallway that no longer felt unfamiliar. Evelyn was in her chair again, wrapped in a thicker sweater this time. She looked toward the window, watching the rain hit the glass. She didn't turn her head when she heard him enter. "You came in the rain," she said. "I figured you'd be watching it." "I always did like the sound." He walked over and sat in the chair beside her. Same place every time. It had become theirs now. "I brought something," he said, pulling the photo out from the folder. Evelyn looked at it for a moment before reaching out and taking it gently into her hands. She adjusted her glasses and stared at it longer than he expected. It was a picture from a decade ago. A group of volunteers standing in front of a makeshift holiday display in the hallway. In the center, a younger version of David with a clipboard and a lopsided Santa hat. Off to the side, sitting in a wheelchair with a red scarf around her neck, was Evelyn. She let out a soft breath. "I remember this day. You made us sing Christmas carols. You all sang out of tune." He laughed. "And you still clapped like we were the Vienna Boys Choir." She tapped the photo with one finger. "I kept one like this for years." "You did?" "In the drawer. It started to fade, so they took it during one of the room cleanings. I didn't fight them for it. I didn't think I'd ever see it again." David paused. "You never told me that." "You never asked." They both smiled. He watched her for a moment, the way her hands held the photo, carefully, like it was something fragile, like it mattered more than she let on. "I should have come back sooner," he said. "I could have reminded you where you came from," she replied. "I think I forgot for a while," he admitted. "I got busy chasing promotions, city apartments, everything that looked like success. And now, I miss the things that felt real." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze still on the photo. "That's the trick, isn't it? Real things never shout. You have to be still long enough to notice them." He sat back. "Let that settle." "You ever feel forgotten?" he asked. "All the time," she said honestly. "It's not anyone's fault. People get older and the world keeps going. I've had neighbors come and go, nurses rotate in and out. Some days I feel invisible. But then..." She stopped and held up the photo. "Then something like this comes back, and I realize someone remembered." David felt a quiet lump in his throat. He looked out the window. Rain still poured steadily. Cars passed on the street, their headlights smeared in the glass. The world hadn't slowed down, but in this room, time had. "I've been thinking about moving back," he said. She glanced at him. "Really?" "Yeah. There's a job opening at the community center. Outreach coordinator. It's not glamorous, but it's good work." "Sounds like you." He nodded. "I think I want to be somewhere that remembers who I was." "You could come on Tuesdays," she said casually. "That's when they serve the good soup." He smiled. "I'll bring muffins. Blueberry." She leaned back, her eyes returning to the photo in her lap. "You know," she said, "most people don't get to know they were remembered, but I do." David sat quietly beside her, and he realized sometimes the most meaningful moments aren't about doing something big. Sometimes they're just about coming back. Evelyn wasn't in her chair. When David stepped into room 114 that morning, everything looked the same. Bed made, lamp on, window cracked just slightly open. But the chair by the window sat empty. For a split second, his stomach dropped. He glanced around, unsure if he had come too early or too late. Then he heard it. Laughter, faint and familiar, coming from the hallway just outside. He turned and looked through the open doorway. Down the hall, past the nurse's station, Evelyn was in the activity room, seated at a long table beside three other residents. There was a deck of cards on the table and a half-finished jigsaw puzzle spread between them. She didn't see him right away. She was focused on placing a puzzle piece, tongue slightly poking out in concentration, a habit he remembered from years ago. Her hands moved slower now, but they moved with purpose. David smiled and walked over, quietly taking a seat on the chair beside hers. "You're in a different spot today," he said. She didn't flinch. "They dragged me out here, said I needed light stimulation." He looked at the puzzle. "Is this the stimulating part?" "No, that's Doris. She's been arguing with me about whether this piece is part of the sky or the lake for the last 20 minutes. The woman across from Evelyn let out a playful groan. "It's the lake, Evelyn." "It's clearly sky," Evelyn said without looking up, "but I'm too polite to say you're wrong." David chuckled and leaned forward. "Need a tiebreaker?" "Only if you agree with me," she replied. He glanced at the piece and smiled. "Sky, obviously." Doris rolled her eyes. "You're just trying to win points with her." "He's already got them," Evelyn said. "He came back." That sentence hung there for a moment, soft but noticeable. David felt it. So did the others at the table. One of the aides walked by, offering juice cups and a tray of small crackers. Evelyn declined, as she always did. David took a cup of apple juice and set it in front of her anyway. "You never drank apple juice," she said, side-eyeing him. "I'm older now, wiser. Apple juice is underrated." "Still tastes like sugar water," she muttered, but she didn't push it away. They stayed in the activity room longer than he planned. An hour passed, then another. They talked about nothing and everything. Evelyn told stories about the other residents, how Doris had once convinced a nurse to smuggle her a milkshake, how the man by the window used to be a magician in the 60s, how the TV remote in the lounge hadn't worked in 3 weeks, but no one had the heart to complain. She still noticed the details, always had. Eventually, the group began to drift away, nurses collecting residents for lunch or rest. Evelyn stayed seated, eyes on the puzzle. David reached out and placed the piece she'd been debating earlier. It fit perfectly in the corner of the blue sky. "Told you," he said quietly. She didn't gloat, just smiled. He leaned back. "I'm glad I found you again." "I never went anywhere," she said. He looked at her, and for the first time since his return, he realized she had been waiting, not just for him, but for something steady, something that would come back and stay, even if only for a while. "I think I needed to know you were still you," he said. "And you were still you," she replied. There was a pause. "I'm thinking about asking the nursing home director if they need volunteers again," he said. Evelyn's eyes lit up, but she stayed composed. "They could use someone who knows the difference between lake and sky." "Guess I better stay sharp." She looked at him, then reached out and patted his hand. "Good," she said, "because I'm not going anywhere yet." And in that quiet, ordinary room filled with half-finished puzzles and forgotten juice cups, David knew something had changed. He hadn't just returned. He'd come home. David started showing up twice a week after that. Tuesdays and Fridays. No official title, no uniform, no clipboard. Just him. A familiar face who knew how to fold blankets properly, refill water pitchers without spilling, and, most importantly, listen. Evelyn never asked why he was coming so often now. She just made room for him in the chair by the window and pretended it had always been his. Room 114 had become part of his routine. He'd stop by the coffee shop down the street first. 1 hot tea for her, no sugar, and 1 black coffee for himself. Then he'd walk the hallway that used to feel like a memory, and now felt like part of his present. On this particular Tuesday, she was waiting for him with something in her lap. A small box, She didn't say anything about it at first, just greeted him with a nod, accepted her tea, and commented on how the hallway smelled like floor cleaner and regret. He laughed. It's better than the elevator. Someone spilled soup in there yesterday. I heard, she said. Third floor smells like chicken broth now. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. He asked about the puzzle in the activity room. She asked about his latest attempt at cooking, a dish he proudly called burnt lasagna with character. Then she placed the box on the table between them. I kept something for you, she said. David looked at it. The lid was slightly crooked, the edges frayed. The kind of box people use to hold things they don't want to throw away but don't know where else to put. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded note, a faded photo, and a small ceramic owl no bigger than a golf ball. He blinked. Is this? The owl you gave me the week you left, she said. You said it was for wisdom. I thought it was ugly, but I kept it anyway. He laughed, picking it up. I bought this from a campus gift shop for $3. Terrible craftsmanship, she nodded, but meaningful. He looked at the photo. It was the same one he had shown her earlier, the group shot from the volunteer Christmas event. But this copy was clearer, not bent or faded. She had written something on the back. People leave, but not all of them forget. David stared at it for a long moment. I always meant to come back, he said quietly. I know, she replied. I should have written. I should have called. You didn't have to. This, she gestured toward the space between them. This makes up for it. He folded the note gently, placed the owl back in the box, and set it aside. You ever think about leaving here? He asked. Sometimes. But I've made peace with it. I have a window, I have a chair, I have visitors who remember what I looked like 10 years ago. That's more than some people get. He nodded slowly. She leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why now? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I forgot what mattered for a long time. And then I found that old photo, and I remembered what it felt like to just sit with someone and talk about nothing and everything. She smiled. You missed the quiet. I missed being known. Her expression softened. You still are. He glanced around the room. It wasn't fancy. Nothing on the walls had changed, but it felt full now in a way it never had before. Think they'll let me paint the hallway? He asked. You'd have to bribe Doris. She's the gatekeeper? Of everything, she said. David grinned and leaned back in the chair, tea in hand. Outside, it had started raining again. Lightly. Just enough to tap against the window. Inside, they sat quietly. Not because they ran out of things to say, but because being there, really there, was enough. On Friday morning, David arrived later than usual. Traffic had been slow, and the bakery forgot to bag the tea separately, so by the time he made it to room 114, the paper handle had ripped, and the cups were dangerously close to tipping. But none of that mattered once he stepped inside. Evelyn was in bed this time, not her usual chair. A nurse stood near the foot of the bed, adjusting a monitor. David paused at the door. Everything okay? The nurse turned and smiled. She's fine. Just feeling a little tired today. Nothing serious. You can go in. David walked over and set the cups down on the table. Brought your usual, he said gently. Hope it survived the commute. Evelyn turned her head slowly, a smile flickering on her face. You're late. He pulled the chair closer. I figured you needed the extra sleep. She nodded slightly. That, or the staff finally got sick of hearing me argue with Doris. David sat down, watching her carefully. She looked thinner today. Her voice was softer, but her eyes still held that same calm intelligence he remembered from the first day they met. "I missed our Tuesday meeting," she said. "You didn't miss anything. I was there. You were just off duty." She gave a small laugh. "That's one way to put it." David hesitated, then leaned forward. "You scared me a little." "I scared myself," she admitted. "But it's nothing dramatic, just age doing what age does." He looked around the room, trying to find something to make it feel lighter. "I brought you something." Her eyebrows raised. "Please don't say it's another muffin." "No," he said, reaching into his bag. "Better." He pulled out a small, framed photo, a new one. It was him and Evelyn, taken by one of the nurses 2 weeks ago in the activity room. She was in her chair, laughing mid-sentence, and he was beside her holding a puzzle piece like it was gold. She stared at it for a long moment. This is lovely." "I thought your wall needed something current." She nodded slowly. "Most of what's on that wall is from the before." David asked, "Before what?" "Before everyone forgot." He looked at her. "But I didn't." She met his eyes. "No, you came back." They were quiet for a minute. The beeping of a monitor filled the space where words might have gone. Then Evelyn spoke again. "You know, I used to believe life was mostly about leaving. People leave homes, jobs, schools, even memories. I prepared myself for that. And now? Now I think it's more about returning. Who comes back? Who shows up when they don't have to?" David swallowed. "I didn't show up for a long time." She reached for his hand. "But when you did, you stayed." Her hand was smaller than he remembered. Bony, but steady. He held it gently. "I think about that a lot," he said. "How many things I missed while I was trying to build a life that looked impressive on paper." "You've still got time," Evelyn said, "to build one that feels right instead." David nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do now." "You're off to a good start." He smiled. "You always were my best reference." She closed her eyes for a moment, her hand still in his. "Promise me something?" "Of course," he said. "When I'm gone, don't stop coming here. There are others. Others who don't have someone." David's throat tightened. "Evelyn." "I'm not scared," she said softly. "Just tired. But I want to know this place still has someone who remembers." He squeezed her hand. "I promise." She opened her eyes again. "Good. Then I can rest a little easier." David stayed longer that day. Not because she asked, but because for the first time he felt the weight of the promise he'd made, and how much it mattered that he keep it. The next Tuesday, Evelyn was not in room 114. David stood at the doorway, holding the usual cup of tea, unsure what to do with it. Her bed was made. The lights were off. No soft hum of her voice from the chair. No quick remark about the hallway's smell or the temperature of the tea. He turned and walked to the nurse's station, his heart picking up speed. A nurse he recognized, Clara, looked up and smiled gently when she saw him. "She's okay," Clara said quickly, seeing the concern on his face. "They moved her to room 117. It's closer to the nurse's desk, just easier to keep an eye on her." David exhaled, nodding. "Thank you." "She asked about you this morning, said you were late again." David laughed quietly. "Sounds like her." He walked the short distance to room 117 and knocked once before opening the door. Evelyn was sitting up in bed this time, a little pale, a little slower, but her eyes were still unmistakably hers. "Took you long enough," she said. David grinned and stepped inside. "I bring tea and get attitude. That's our thing now, huh?" It keeps you grounded, she replied. He set the cup on her bedside table and pulled the chair close. I liked your old room better. So did I, but apparently this one gets better Wi-Fi. David raised an eyebrow. You use Wi-Fi? I don't. But the nurses keep telling me I should try video calls. I told them I'm not trying to become a YouTube star at 88. He laughed and sat back in the chair, watching her carefully. You're looking a little better today. I'm trying, she said. Every day's a bit different now, but I figured I should stick around. Can't have you wandering the halls without supervision. He smiled. Don't worry, you're still in charge. She took a slow sip of the tea. You know, I've been thinking about that promise you made. David nodded. The one about staying, about being here even after... She finished it for him. Even after I'm gone. He looked down at his hands. I meant it. I know you did, she said softly. That's why I wanted to ask you something. Anything, David replied. There's a woman here, 2 rooms down. Name's Alice. Doesn't get visitors. She used to be a teacher, too. Taught music. Her mind's not all there anymore, but her hands still remember the piano keys. David listened carefully. She doesn't talk much, Evelyn continued, but sometimes she hums songs, old ones. You should sit with her sometime, just for a few minutes. I will, David said. I'll start this week. Evelyn looked at him with a mix of pride and peace. Good. She reached over to the drawer beside her and pulled something out. It was the small ceramic owl again. I want you to take this back, she said. David frowned. But you said you were keeping it. I did, but I don't need it now. You do. He took it carefully. The same chipped paint, the same crooked eyes, the same reminder. It's not worth much, she said, but it holds things, moments, time, all the things we forget unless we decide not to. He swallowed hard. I'll keep it safe. She gave a small nod. I know you will. They sat together in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't feel empty, the kind that says everything when words aren't needed. Eventually, Evelyn looked out the window. Promise me one more thing? David turned to her. Of course. When you come back next week, bring 2 teas. He smiled through the tightness in his chest. 2? One for you, she said, and one for Alice. David nodded slowly. You got it. She closed her eyes then, not asleep, just resting. Her face calm, her hands folded. David sat quietly beside her, holding the owl in his palm. And in that moment, he understood what she had been giving him all along. Not just wisdom, but the responsibility to carry it forward. David came alone the next time. He walked the familiar hallway with 2 cups of tea in hand. Room 117 was quiet. No laughter. No sarcastic greeting from the bed. Just the door slightly ajar, and a nurse gently closing a chart at the foot of the bed. Clara saw him first and walked over. Hi, David, she said softly. He already knew, before she said anything. He knew. When? He asked. Last night, Clara replied. Peaceful, in her sleep, no pain. David nodded, eyes fixed on the cup of tea in his hand, still warm. She would have made a joke about it being barely drinkable. Clara touched his arm. She left something for you. He followed her down the hallway and into a small staff room. She handed him a sealed envelope. On the front, in small, uneven handwriting, it said, David, open after tea. He didn't open it right away. He walked back down the hall, past room 117, and kept going. 2 doors down, just like Evelyn had said. Room 119. He knocked once, then opened the door quietly. The woman inside, Alice, was sitting in a recliner near the window, thin, frail, and quiet. Her eyes didn't look up when he entered. "Hi, Alice," David said gently. "My name's David. I'm a friend of Evelyn's." She didn't answer, but her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and she hummed something low under her breath. A tune with no words. Soft. Old. "I brought tea," he said, walking in. "I didn't know how you'd take it, but I figured we could figure that out together." He set one cup on the table beside her and took the chair across from her, just like he always did. For a few minutes he just sat there. No pressure to speak, no reason to rush. Then she did something small, but unmistakable. She reached for the cup. David smiled, a quiet sort of smile, the kind Evelyn had given him so many times. He stayed for about 20 minutes. They didn't talk, but Alice kept humming. He listened. When he stood to leave, he said softly, "I'll see you again soon." She didn't look up, but the humming continued. Back outside, David sat on a bench near the front entrance of the nursing home. The sun was warm on his back. The envelope was still in his hand. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the same shaky hand. "Dear David, if you're reading this, it means I've done what we all do eventually, gone where you can't follow just yet. But I hope you're not sitting alone. I hope you brought tea to someone who needs it. You asked me once if I ever felt forgotten. The truth is, I did. A lot. But then you came back, and it reminded me that sometimes people don't forget. They just take a while to return. You made good on your promise. Now I'm asking you to make one more. Don't just visit the people who are waiting. Be the reason they remember they're worth being visited. You're good at that. You always were. The world doesn't need more impressive people, David. It needs more present ones. Love, Evelyn." David folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease down with his thumb. He sat still for a long moment, watching the cars pass on the road nearby. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. She had said everything. He stood, tucked the letter into his jacket pocket, and walked back inside. This time, he didn't head to room 114, or 117. He stopped at the front desk and asked a simple question. "Are there any other residents here who don't get many visitors?" The woman behind the desk looked up, surprised. "There are a few. Would you like a list?" David smiled. "Yes, please." And just like that, Evelyn's promise kept moving, room by room, visit by visit. Never forgotten, just passed on. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.